Okay, so what does, excuse me. So, what does religion have to do with human trafficking? That's very hard to explain, but I think I went into a little bit of information in one of my other videos. I don't remember the title, but I want to say I talked about it in one of my gang stalking videos where I was explaining how religion. I think I went into more depth on how, at least as far as my personal experience, I think it was my testimony, gang stalking my testimony video, where I was saying that as far as my family background, um, our religious ties had a strong connection to the human trafficking. Well, basically, it really depends on how the family deals with someone disagreeing with their religious beliefs. So let me make a disclaimer. Not all religious people handle someone disagreeing with their religion the same way. There are some parents, like, for example, there are some religious parents who allow their children to choose what they believe. And then there are some parents who may not believe in religion at all. They may be more spiritual, or they may be atheists, but their children may be religious. Or the whole entire family, may be religious, but everybody still gets a choice. It's just the children may choose to follow the same beliefs as their parents. It really depends on how the family takes a difference in opinion. It really depends, and it also depends on the integrity of the family as well. Now, being born into a narcissistic family, depending on which family members are narcissistic, the narcissist in the family do not have integrity. They don't have that at all. Therefore, they're willing to use religion as a platform to increase the likelihood of them not getting caught doing bad things. A lot of narcissistic families will claim to believe in a particular religion, and then behind closed doors they may not actually believe that particular religion, or they may actually believe it, but they're so devout that they allow their beliefs to control their lives and the lives of other family members. And if we look into the history of religion and slavery have a very strong trauma bond. I believe that religion could be used, depending on the heart and the integrity of the person who is preaching the message, could be used as something productive. It really could be. It could be used to teach people valuable lessons in life. Any holy book that you can think of, any religious practice that you can think of, can be used for good. It really just depends on the people who are practicing and the people who are teaching others, teaching their followers. It really depends. But if the person who is religious is narcissistic, there's no integrity attached to the teachings. Therefore we get, priests and popes touching children. That's not to say that all priests and all popes touch children. It's just the integrity behind that particular priest or Pope. And therefore a lot of religious leaders have a bad rep for being pedophiles and sexual predators, not necessarily because all religious leaders and have what am I trying to say? It's not because all religious leaders have pedophilic and predatory mindsets. It's just a lot of narcissists use religion as a platform to hide their devious nature. Therefore, religion has a bad rep for that. And even it's even gotten to the point where spirituality and certain holistic practices, leaders within those groups also are starting to have a bad rep too. It's really that occult mindset. And that occult mindset spreads into the family dynamic, therefore making the family heavily narcissistic, therefore creating creating generational curses in the family. And once there's a generational curse within the family, it is very hard to break it, because the person or the people who decide to be different from that narcissistic family dynamic, from the generational curse, a lot of times are met with extreme amounts of cruelty and sabotage. So like I said, just that occult mindset, it doesn't always have to be religion, but as far as my particular testimony, because I chose not to follow religion, because I chose to try to eat better, my family members saw me as an easy target to be a scapegoat. I was just an easy target because it's just like a polar bear on a warm climate filled with grizzly bears. It's just like a lion going into a cave filled with hyenas. You know, that it is whoever is, the species that doesn't align with their environment is naturally going to be isolated, persecuted, ridiculed, alienated. It almost goes against nature for a black sheep or a scapegoat to be around a pack of lions or wolves. I mean, that's the dynamic, though. That's a dynamic that has been created when it comes to being scapegoated or being labeled as a black sheep in a narcissistic family dynamic. And as far as my testimony, I definitely had to deal with a lot of abuse from my family members. And a lot I may have either suppressed, or maybe my family members gaslit me into forgetting. But I had to suffer a lot of abuse because I chose to be different. I made a conscious decision to be different. If I had chosen to be just like my family members, then I wouldn't be having this conversation. But the reality of the situation was, my family members are responsible for me and other innocent children in the family dynamic for being human trafficked. And I don't know if there are other family members, if my family members are talking about this. Maybe some of them have spoken out about the abuse in the family. But I definitely was labeled one of the scapegoats, and I had to endure public humiliation. I dealt with molestation in my family. I was isolated from friends, from classmates, from my work environment, by my own family. My family members, my direct family, my immediate family members went out of their way to isolate me from anyone who could possibly help me. And I mean, I can come up with all these different conclusions as to why they did what they did, all these different theories. I can't really sometimes when it comes to narcissists, because their thinking is so skewed, and healthy people, we don't think like narcissists. So a lot of the times we can just simply say, oh, they do it because of this and that. But only a narcissist can really say why they do what they do. And a lot of them say they do what they do for narcissistic supply. Most of it is negative fuel. But if we want to dive a little deeper, I mean, if I'm going to dive a little deeper, I can't speak for other people though. People who have been scapegoated, they can relate to me up to a certain point, but it's our responsibility as scapegoats and black sheeps to speak up and tell our stories. But, speaking from my own personal experience, there was a lot of sexual abuse in the family. And for me, it happened at home, it happened at school, it happened at work, it happened in public. It happened anywhere that the abusers in my family could get away with it in. And that's not really something that I'm too proud to talk about, because nobody wants to talk about, their private lives. Nobody wants to share embarrassing and unfavorable memories with people that they don't know. But the reality of it is, and I'm speaking for all scapegoats and black sheeps when I say this, but a lot of the times, the abuse that we face, and I'm explaining this to people who don't understand what it's like to be in a narcissistic family dynamic. For those who are born into a narcissistic, occultic family dynamic, know exactly what I'm talking about, and they completely understand what I'm saying, what I'm referring to. And basically what is understood doesn't really need to be explained, except for in the comment section below, of course. For those who have been through narcissistic abuse in the family and they want to share their story, they may not want to necessarily talk about it on their platform. It's okay for you to tell your story and share your story in the comment section below if you feel comfortable, or if you've witnessed other family members who have gone through it, and you want to maybe perhaps you want to keep that family member anonymous and you just want to share their story. Go ahead, because the reality of the situation is, for those who want to break the cycle of the narcissistic family dynamic, it's best to speak up. I know it's hard. Speaking from experience, it's not easy to talk about abuse in the family, especially when it's so close, when it's happened for such a long time, and it's by people that you trust. Like for me, a lot of my family members were involved in this. I mean, my father, my sister, my mother, my brother, my cousins, my grandparents. I mean, it's just like we were all involved in this, and it's like being born into a narcissistic family dynamic, it is so toxic that it's hard to point fingers. It's hard to find out who to point fingers at. It's hard to identify the problem. It is. It's so hard to identify who it is to blame, because it's a generational curse. It's a generational curse, right? So it's, grandfather to granddaughter, mother to son, sister to sister, cousin to cousin, uncle to nephew or niece, right? So it's very hard to find that one person to blame, because in these narcissistic family dynamics, it's been going on for so many years, hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. I know it may seem like it's exaggerating, but the reality of it is, the human species has been on this planet for so long. And when we're talking about generational curses, narcissism is not a new concept. It didn't just start with the European race. And I know that and I'm not trying to make this about race, but let's just keep it real here. We as black people, we love to blame the European race for a lot of things. And narcissism has existed long before the European species was even here, long before the Asiatic species was even here. So as much as we as black people, I'm taking account of, I'm willing to address that we as black people, as the African race, we need to start taking accountability for our negative history, so that we're not always putting it off on other races, so that we need to address the issues in our own foundation. We need to address the issues in our own backyard, instead of always trying to shit in somebody else's backyard and then blaming it on them for it being there. And then when we're caught, we're saying, "Oh, it's just fertilizer." No. It's in our family. And a lot of black leaders are being exposed for this. And I can say that some of them I'm related to. Some of them are my relatives. I'm not going to say names yet. I'm not going to say names now. But some of them are some of these leaders, these black leaders, some of them scapegoats are our family members. They are. And at least I'm like I said, let me make a disclaimer. I'm not trying to make this about race. But I know that in the black family dynamic, from my own personal testimony, talking about mental health issues is taboo. I tried talking about mental health issues in my family, and it was quickly dismissed. Never talked about again. I tried doing this many times, and it was ignored. It was overlooked. It was dismissed. It was neglected. And the problems became worse and worse and worse, because in the black family, it's taboo to talk about mental illness. It's taboo to talk about sexuality. At least in my family dynamic. And as far as the black community is concerned, speaking for the black community, no one wants to talk about, sexuality. People say, "Oh, you're either straight or you getting directed to the gate. You either straight or we gonna display hate." That's how it is in the family. A lot of hate crimes within my family. There was a lot of unhealthy competition in my family, to the point where it got to the point where it became illegal. I can count on both my hands and then some. If I had 4 hands, it still wouldn't be enough times where I've had the police called on me by my own family members to try to get me locked up and sent to jail, all because of envy and unhealthy competition. Petty things that, if only the police had known what some of my family members have done behind closed doors, they wouldn't even be able to pick up a phone and call the police. You know what I'm saying on me? All because I was leaving the family dynamic, breaking the cycle, and deciding to walk away because nobody was willing to make the necessary changes to create a healthy space. I had to get up and leave, on top of the abuse that had already happened by the time I decided I was going to leave. The disrespect in my family. And just to name a couple examples, my mother. My mother is personally responsible for me being human trafficked. And then my sister helped, enabled that type of behavior, because for whatever reasons, I can't really specify. The only thing that I can think of is because she wanted to be the favorite. And we all know that, when we have, or at least with people who know enough about narcissism, when having a narcissistic parent, you can't love your parent You can't love your narcissistic parent into healthy. It don't matter how bad you want them to be healthy, how badly you want them to be normal. They will never be that. Narcissists do not change, and even if they do change, the damage that they've done by the time that they realize who they are, what they are, and that they need to change has already been done, and it's irreversible. Most of the time, unrepairable. It cannot be repaired. And my mother human trafficking me is definitely an example of abuse that cannot be repaired. And you can't just go to somebody. You can't go to a narcissistic parent going to their child and saying, oh, I'm sorry that I intentionally for many, many years human trafficked you and allowed pedophiles to molest you and do all these things to you, including me doing this as well. That's not something you can apologize for. I mean, I'm not saying that. I mean, with the control of the higher power, anything's possible. But the point that I'm trying to make is that going to somebody after doing something terrible like that, you know, I heard a saying, a quote saying that you can't apologize for something premeditated. And you can't apologize for something that you've done over and over and over again, intentionally, knowing the damage that it caused another individual and not caring. It's hard to come back from that. My mother participated in this. My sister participated in this. You know, some of the people that I went to school with participated in this. A lot of other family members participated in it. But the main people, at least in my life, who participated in the human trafficking that happened to me was my grandmother, my mother, my sister, and my ex. All set me up to be human trafficked so that they can make money off of my misfortune. Because like I said, because I was being scapegoated. And my family members were mentally ill. They were sick. Narcissists are sick and devious and evil people. And they will do whatever it is that they want to do to get that negative fuel. Even if it means something as horrible as human trafficking. Terrible. That is a terrible, horrible, awful crime to be accused of. Especially and to do it to a family member, that's cruel. But that just shows you that I had to get out of that dynamic. That just shows you I had to get out of that dynamic. Now, for some people who've been in narcissistic family dynamics, their abuse may not have been as severe as mine is. Or some scapegoats in narcissistic family dynamics may have gone through way, way worse. Some of them ain't even alive today because of their family members. Some of them are alive to tell the stories, but they've been through so much worse than I have and barely made it out alive. And that's unfortunate. I would never wish narcissistic abuse on anyone, not even my worst enemy. But the reality of it is, you know, a lot of times the source will set up a situation where a good person is born into a narcissistic family to break the cycle. That's the whole point, unfortunately. I would never wish that on anybody, but circumstances like that happen to break that cycle, to break that generational curse, and to wake other family members up to the cruelty, to the evil that's in the family, and getting everybody to understand how damaging it is to be that way, to act that way, to enable that type of behavior. Some people in the narcissistic family dynamic may not necessarily be narcissists, but they are enablers. They are toxic codependents. And it's really up to people who are not narcissists. I'm not speaking to narcissists. I feel like when it comes to narcissists, we need to stop trying to change them. We need to stop trying to help them and let a higher power take care of them. Once they've been identified as a narcissist, we have to let them go. If we're willing to let go of somebody who hurt us really, really badly, and they may be a good person, they just toxic at the time, they're not necessarily healthy to be around, or we may not have meant to be in each other's lives, then we need to let these narcissists go much faster, because they're capable of doing far worse with malicious intent and sadism involved. They enjoy it. They get a high off of it. Versus when we're dealing with good people who just simply are unhealthy and make mistakes, they actually feel guilt. They feel shame. They feel remorse for what they've done. And a good person, we have our limits. We have our standards. Narcissists don't. Good people don't human traffic. Good people don't do the things that narcissists do and get a high from it. They don't get sexual pleasure from touching little children. That's not what good people do, even if they're toxic. Like I said, good people don't human traffic. Good people get caught up in human trafficking and are at times forced to do things that they're not willing to do if they had their own free will, such as be a groomer, for example. I'm not making excuses for anyone, but being in the human trafficking trade is a violation of free will. And some people who are involved in it are not necessarily traffickers or handlers. They're actually victims being forced to do the dirty work of the traffickers and the handlers. Let me make that very clear. But only narcissists are capable and able to do such heinous crimes without feeling any guilt, shame, or remorse. A lot of them feel happy. They feel empowered. They feel a sense of grandiosity for what they do because they're narcissists. They're evil people. They either have no soul, or whatever soul they have left is demonic. Imagine being an innocent child born into a family like that, where either it's narcissists or enablers or codependents. Imagine that. Imagine how toxic that is and how hard it is for a person to get out of that. It's very hard. Very, very, very hard. And it's hard to speak out against... It's hard to speak out against the iniquity in the family when you're being ganged up on by different family members, stalked by different family members, harassed by different family members, sabotaged. It's very, very hard to do. On top of how uncomfortable it is to share with the world how our power was taken away from us by people we trusted. Imagine how hard that is for a person. It only takes empathy and compassion and sympathy to understand those concepts. Things that a narcissist does not have. All it takes is for a good person, a healthy person, to put themselves in the shoes of a victim, of a survivor, of a warrior, of narcissistic abuse to understand how hard that is. So, for the people who may not necessarily understand what it's like to be born into a narcissistic family dynamic, and they probably think, the victim is weak for not speaking up. The victim is stupid for not speaking up. I know most people don't think like this, but there are some who probably think, who probably, when they see abuse happening to a person, they're probably thinking, They're probably angry. They're like, well, why are you allowing this to happen to you? Let me explain to those who may not understand. When going through a severe kind of abuse, such as molestation, sexual abuse, physical abuse, gaslighting, cognitive dissonance, because we go through these phases when we're in the toxic dynamic and when we get out of it. When we get out of it, sometimes we end up attracting predators who are just like our family members, maybe even in some cases worse. So it took the little bit of strength that we had left after. Most of the time when we're born into narcissistic family dynamics, it's been happening to us from the moment that we could talk. Sometimes even for some people it happened when they came out the womb, they were molested, and that's sick. But the reality of it is, when we're talking about narcissists, pedophilic narcissists, there's no limitation to how far they'll go to get sexual gratification, unfortunately, or whatever form. Some even will physically beat up a newborn child. Some of them will put hands on a newborn or a baby that's just only a few months old because they're that sick. They'll beat up a child like how they beat up a grown adult. They'll yell and scream at a child because, when children are babies, they're vulnerable. And especially if either both parents are sick in the head, or there's a single parent household and the only parent that's maintaining the household is sick. Unfortunately, there are parents that get away with a lot because a child doesn't know better, especially if they can't talk. And even when the child can talk, they don't know better, so they don't know that something wrong is going on, unfortunately. So a lot of us who are born in narcissistic family dynamics, we've been abused our entire lives. Imagine, most people move move away from their family and move out on their own. I'd say roughly around 20, 25 years old. I'd say that's about a good average. That's the majority of when people move out, when children move out of the household. So imagine 20, 25 years of abuse on a daily basis, what that could do to a person in their mind, the way they think, how would it affect their individual strength, right? And then also the threats that come with escaping, right? Because when a scapegoat or a black sheep leaves a narcissistic family, a lot of the times it's not just one family member that'll gang up on the scapegoat or the black sheep. It's everybody that's involved. Everybody that's involved in the abuse will gang up on that one person and do everything they can to make that person's life a living hell. Will do everything they can to sabotage that person from reaching a certain amount of success. Will do everything in their power to humiliate, to isolate, to defame someone's character that chooses to break the cycle and leave the toxic family dynamic. So not only was that person being abused while they're with the family, but when they decide to leave the family, they're still being abused on top of that. The abuse doesn't stop. Most of the time, the abuse gets worse when the scapegoat or black sheep leaves the family. Imagine that. 20 plus years of being abused and then finally deciding to leave, thinking, well, if I leave, things will get better, and they get worse. On top of the fact, not to mention that when we do leave, a lot of the times, what's the first thing we're looking for? Help, support. Imagine an entire generation or two of family members ganging up on one person, preventing them from getting the help they need, preventing them from getting the support they need, isolating them from all the healthy support that they could have had while leaving, right? Imagine how emotionally and mentally draining that is for a person. So when they leave, they're getting met with even more abuse. I haven't even gotten to the part where they start to speak up and tell their story. So it's abuse times 10 in the house, abuse times 30 when they leave the house, and abuse times 100 when they speak up and tell their story. It could be to the police. It could be on social media. It could be to a trusted family or a trusted friend. It could be to anybody. Narcissistic family members can tell when a person is either about to speak up or has already done so. So imagine one person having to go against 100 or more different people in the family just to survive, just to feel like an individual, a human being again. Imagine how hard that is for just one person. No help at all, no guidance, no support, just cognitive dissonance and CPTSD and some deep-seated healing that needs to happen. Imagine how hard that is for one person to go to. And I'm speaking for the individual, because most of the time when there is a scapegoat or black sheep that breaks the cycle, they're on their own. Most of the time, there isn't anyone else that's brave enough to be the black sheep or the scapegoat as well. No one willingly chooses to be that role anyway. It's too hard for one person to just choose to be in. A lot of the times when somebody chooses to be a scapegoat or a black sheep, they have no idea what they're in for. And even some of them do know exactly what they're in for, and the abuse just gets so intolerable that we have no other choice but to make that decision. Because the abuse is just too intolerable to accept and to overlook anymore. It's just too intolerable because narcissists do not know when to stop. When predators get past the grooming process, they do not know when to stop. They could receive several warnings from other people. Hey man, you getting too obvious. Your abuse is getting, you know how enablers are. Flying monkeys. Hey man, it's getting to the point where it's getting too obvious. You getting sloppy. Or, even some codependents would be like, look, I was with you at first. Now I'm not with you anymore. You're going too far. This is going past my moral code. Then you meet other narcissists that are like, look, man, I'd be with you on this, but either, that's a little bit too dark for me, or things are becoming too obvious and I'm no longer getting the supply that I want or need from this person. So I can't help you no more. Right? And it's the narcissist who for a particular reason won't leave you alone. It's either because you're either grade A supply, or maybe it's gotten personal. Sometimes it does get personal. Most of the time, narcissistic abuse is not personal. Most of the time it isn't. But in some rare occasions, it does get personal. Maybe because they feel like they're about to get exposed, or maybe they just have no respect for you and they don't feel like they should stop, and maybe they've gotten so grandiose that they feel like they'll never get caught. They've gotten away with it for so long that they'll never get caught. Who knows? But most narcissists, most toxic people, and even some narcissists, once it gets to the point where they're no longer benefiting from abusing you, they'll leave you alone, and they'll leave you alone for good. But there are some narcissists out there, like I said, that are part of the dark triad: the malignant narcissists, the Machiavellian narcissists, the psychopaths, and the sociopaths. Those are the people who will keep coming back, even if they've gone to jail. They can go to jail for 10, 20 years for a crime, get out, and go right back to the same person that they went to jail for. I know it's stupid, but I feel like once it gets to the point where they've really picked a target and they've really gotten comfortable with that person, they've gotten fat and well satisfied off that supply, it's like they can't stop. It's like a drug addict. It's like a drug addict. And I think in some cases, in some rare cases, it gets personal. Because the victim is fighting back. The victim is challenging that narcissist perception of themselves. I've had several dark triad narcissists come at me and not know when to stop. They're still doing that to this day. I have some family members that are still picking at me to this day. My grandmother and my sister are specifically the ones that keep targeting me, that I would definitely consider to be a part of the dark triad, for sure. Because they were given many warnings to stop. I warned them to stop. The police have warned them to stop. The social workers have warned them to stop. And they keep coming at me. They keep doing this. They keep doing it. At least in my personal situation. Most of the narcissists in my life have been forced to stop, whether it was because I moved or it was because I ignored them, I blocked them, I wouldn't respond to their hoovers, and they stopped. Most of them stopped and left me alone. Most of them have stopped. No, seriously, like they hoover, I ignored them, they left me alone for good. But it was a few people that I was close to that refused to leave me alone, and when the law got involved, they left me alone. For the most part. Because I got, I have a restraining order. I have a protective order against them. So they have to stop. Right? Or they'll go to prison. And I know they don't want to go to prison, but the reality of it is, if they're given these warnings, all these warnings to stop, and they don't, not only do I not have any other choice but to get the authorities involved, the justice system involved, but the justice system is going to have to do their job and assert their authority on the people who refuse to leave me alone. Because it's gotten to that point. And it gets to that point when we're dealing with narcissists who are part of the dark triad, who in no way, shape, or form plan on stopping until they're either put in a straitjacket, put in a jail cell, or in some cases, and this is the most unfortunate one, but sometimes it does get to this point, but if they're given a punishment by death, some of them are given that punishment because even if they're inside a jail cell, they'll use flying monkeys on the outside to harass you. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are just some that are relentless. There are some that are just so obsessed with that supply that they just have to keep doing it, even if it goes against their best interest. Because supply is they're kind of like a spiritual booty warrior. Booty is more important. Like, narcissistic supply is more important than food, more important than water, more important than the air they breathe, more important than their freedom to walk this earth as they please. And that was low-key a bar, but I'm just saying, like, narcissists, that are part of the dark triad really don't know when to stop. And that's when you get those who end up on first 48 and end up like, Jeffrey Dahmer, only known for the crimes that they commit and nothing else. Nothing else good to know about them. Because all they've done is hurt people and terrorize people and abuse people. And there's a lot of people like that in my family. A lot of them. To the point where I had to get up and move away from my family. I had to ignore them. I had to cut pretty much all of my family members off because they were either narcissists or they were enablers. In some way, shape, or form, they're enablers, whether they were codependents or they were just the quote-unquote peacemakers. Some of them were peacemakers, but they just were not healthy enough to make a stand and break the cycle. They're willing to brush off the issue and ignore it. but they weren't really, really willing to step up and expose people and tell their story. Not a lot of them were not willing to do that. So I had to cut them off. Anything less than standing with me and telling your story and not allowing this abuse to happen, I had to cut off. And that was pretty much everybody. No one wants to be the scapegoat, but the reality of the situation is it's better to be a scapegoat than an enabler. Because sometimes, in some unfortunate cases, a narcissist will take everybody down with them, including an enabler. An enabler is the closest one to grab. When the narcissist is fallen, when the narcissist is collapsed, who do you think is going to be the first person that the narcissist goes for? The enabler. To help nurse them back to health. I don't want to be an enabler because narcissists don't appreciate anything or anyone. You could give up your whole life for a narcissist. You could pay their bills, take good care of them, be kind to them all their lives, and they will treat you like garbage because the reality of it is they have no soul. They have no conscience. They have no empathy. They cannot express emotions in a healthy way. They cannot love. They will not love. They refuse to love, and that's just how it is. So it's better to be a scapegoat and a black sheep in the toxic family dynamic than it is to be a codependent or an enabler. Because guess what? When the black sheep and the scapegoat escape the narcissistic family for good, forever, it's the enablers who end up watching the narcissist die and are miserable because they're angry at how much of their life they've given to someone that doesn't care about them. Or they end up dying before the narcissist. And they've wasted their entire lives trying to please somebody who could never be satisfied. That's why at the end of the day, the black sheep and the scapegoat, although they face some of the worst betrayal in the family and some of the maximum amount of abuse, that's how it looks on the surface. But the reality of it is the enabler and the codependent, especially the codependent who chooses to stay, because I'm gonna be honest, the black sheep and the scapegoat, the reason why I call them codependents is not necessarily because they choose to be that way, but because our power in the beginning, especially when we are being raised by narcissists, we don't get to choose to be independent until legally we do not get to choose to be independent until we turn 16. When we turn 16, we can emancipate ourselves, but that is an entire process that could take a long time depending on the jury. But a child can be emancipated at the age of 16. But then again, how are they gonna, most apartments, most houses won't let you own or rent unless you're 18 or older. So you see what I'm saying? Like, even if you are emancipated at 16, you have to go somewhere. Most of the time it's to the system, to foster home, until you turn 18. And who's to say that there aren't narcissists in the foster home, right? So it's kind of like, until we turn 18, we are codependent, not by choice, but by age, by legal status. Therefore, we don't really get that choice to just get up and walk away unless some of us become runaways, which, like I said, even if some of us were to become runaways, how do we know that we're not going to attract predators that are just like our narcissistic family members or worse? So you see the loop? It's a loop. But once we get to about a certain age, 18, 20, 21, a legal and appropriate age to leave the household, right? That's when we choose whether or not we become independent. And that's very hard. Growing up as a child, in our adolescent stage, it is the most important for us to have healthy examples, or else we're bound to repeat the sins of our father, right? When we're children, it is very important to have some at least one healthy role model. Even if it's a younger sibling, even if it's a cousin or a friend or a teacher, somebody that's a healthy role model. But there are some of us scapegoats and black sheeps that don't have that at all. Some of us are not taught to speak up. Some of us, even if we wanted to, it'd be too dangerous. It would be way too dangerous for some of us. Way too dangerous. And then, like I said, some people are not taught. They're not taught to speak up. Some people just simply don't know better. So somebody that's not speaking up about their abuse is not always weak. A lot of them just don't know better. A lot of them is too dangerous. To where even if they even think about it, if they even try, they could lose their lives. So I just want to educate those who either have had the strength and the access to speak up and tell their story. That's good for you. And I applaud that. If you're somebody who's been molested and you're somebody that's been abused by family members and have been raised by narcissists, and you've had the strength and the willpower to speak up and tell your story, and you've been doing it for a very, 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 very long time, and you're speaking up for other victims, I applaud that. I respect that, and I applaud that. And I would definitely say encourage other people to speak up and tell their story. Encourage them to speak up and tell their story, for sure. I would definitely say that. But for those who are strong enough to do so, and they know better, and they have the wisdom and the knowledge to speak up, encourage others to speak up. Speak strength into other victims so that they can become warriors just like you. Because I'm pretty sure that at one point in your life, it was either too dangerous for you to speak up, or you may not have had the courage, or it may not have even been a thing of bravery. It may have been a thing where you may have been too ashamed. You may not have been ready to talk about it. You may not have been fully aware what happened, or you may not have remembered everything until tower moments started happening, until your memory started to improve when you got away from the abuser. There was a point in time where you weren't speaking up and telling your story because of A, B, and C. So, just put yourself back in that place where you weren't speaking up for whatever reason that it was. And I'm like almost 100% sure that you had a valid reason for why you didn't speak up right away. Most of the time when victims get away from their abusers, it takes them time to recuperate and process what happened so that once they get to a healthy mindset, a healthy state of mind, they can speak up and tell their story to where they won't scare off other victims. As I know that for some of us, when we first tell our story, a lot of us are very sad, heartbroken, emotional, angry. And when we're in that state and we're telling our stories, it's a lot of people out there that won't really necessarily be able to put themselves in our shoes because we're emotional. And to other people, we look emotional. I know it doesn't matter what people think at the end of the day, because if you tell your story, you tell your story. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if you're going to tell your story, do it right, do it correct, do it in the way to where people can understand, especially those who cannot relate to what you've been through. No one's saying you have to be picture perfect, because that anger has to come out. Let people see that anger. It's okay. If you want to tell your story right away, that's okay. Let people see that anger. Let people empathize with your anger and your hurt and your sadness. Because sometimes our emotional state will say a lot about the abuse that we're going through. And it'll let other people know, especially the justice system. The justice system will be very aware of how severe the abuse is depending on our emotional state. So no one can really tell you when the appropriate time is to tell your story. And don't let anyone tell you the appropriate time to tell your story. And don't let anyone defy your strength based off of the timing in which you tell your story. You have to do it when you're ready, because it's you. Don't let anyone pressure you to be quiet, and don't let anyone to pressure you to speak up. You do it when you're ready, but you got to do it at some point. And know that if you do it, that you are strong. And know that if you didn't feel comfortable right then and there, that doesn't mean you're weak. It just means that you're not ready. You may need some guidance. You may need some advice. You may need some support. And that's okay as well. Because I needed that. I needed that guidance. I needed that support because I didn't have that in my narcissistic family background. I didn't have that. And anybody that tried to support me was abused severely, to the point of, in some cases, death. That's how dangerous being raised and born into narcissistic families. It gets very dangerous when you try to break the cycle. So don't let anybody pressure you. But it is important to tell your story, and you have to do it at some point before you turn over, before you turn in and you meet your maker. You got to do it before that happens. Let it come from you, so that people understand how vulnerable children are, being raised in these environments. Children can't really speak up for themselves. They can only really tell an adult. And it's the adult's responsibility to handle that. And if the adult doesn't handle that responsibility, then that's innocent blood on their hands. But when we become adults, when we're children, yes, it is the adult's responsibility to take care of us. Absolutely. But when we become adults, it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves. Unfortunately, I know it's unfortunate, but when we become adults, it's our responsibility to look out for each other, but it's also our responsibility to save ourselves and to get ourselves out of this situation by the help of the source, of course. But that's a situation. And speaking from my own personal experience, if it had not been for a higher power helping me get out of this dynamic, I wouldn't have made it out alive. I wouldn't have. So I was very fortunate. To get out of this situation alive and without a scratch. I mean, I got some scars, mentally and physically, but I was able to get out nonetheless. And, I share my story not to get clout, of course, because nobody wants, unless they're a narcissist or severely damaged to the point where they're attention seeking and they're trying to seek validation, to where they're just like really damaged, would I be doing this for clout? But no one that's normal and that's a good person would want to talk about this. This is not something that normal people want to have to talk about. We're not doing this for attention. We're doing this to save ourselves, and we're doing this to help other victims as well become thrivers, survivors, and warriors. So I share my story, and because, that's the reason. I didn't want to put my business out there. And I'm be honest, I don't even really feel like it was really my choice. If it were my choice, I would have probably stayed silent and just moved on with my life. But the reality of it was, I wasn't given that choice because I believe I was put here to help break the cycle. I believe I was put here to share what I've been through so that other victims can feel safe enough to tell their story on their own as well, because I was influenced by other warriors. I was influenced by other people who've been through the exact same thing that I've been through. Maybe not as bad or maybe worse. But they had the courage to tell their story, and it influenced me to share mine. It really did. It influenced me. It deeply influenced me to tell my story. And like I said, I didn't want my business out there, but I had to, because when we're dealing with narcissists that are part of the dark triad, it gets to that point. This is the only way that the justice system is able to identify the abusers in our family to help us. Forget that no snitching policy. When it comes to narcissistic abuse, sometimes it gets to that point. Now, don't get me wrong, there are most narcissists that are smart enough to know when to stop because they don't want to be exposed. But when we're dealing with the dark triad, on the other hand, when we're dealing with generational curses and obsessive histrionic personality disorders, those people specifically don't know when to stop. And trust me, I know that it seems strange at first when we do put our business out there, but the reality of it is, it's leaving a trail. It's leaving a trail. So, and this is just from my own personal experience. Say if me and my own family dynamic, right? If I speak up and I tell my story about the abusers in my family, and then say if somebody else in my family decides to speak up and tell their story about the abuse that they suffered in the same family that I was born in, there's going to be a common denominator, and then the justice system is going to be able to better defend the victims and figure out who the problem is. We may not be able to identify who the real problem is in the family. But if enough of us victims speak up and speak out, then the justice system is going to be able to do their job a whole lot more efficiently and a whole lot more swiftly than when we stay quiet. When we stay quiet, we're defending the abuser. When we speak up, we're defending ourselves and other victims. You see what I'm saying? And there's a lot of people, especially nowadays in the age of technology, where a lot of people are speaking up and telling their stories about the abuse that they went through. A lot of people are telling their stories now because we need to. We're in the age of technology and where we need to. And I feel like it's gotten to the point where because of we have all this technology, it's made it easier. And then, like I said, I just feel like there's a lot of people out there that want to break the cycle. They don't want to be abused anymore. They don't even want to be toxic enough to unintentionally abuse someone else. So I believe that not only is technology helping us, but the source is also helping us by getting us away from these narcissistic families at the perfect timing so that we can tell our stories and tell what happened to us. And then when more and more people start to speak up, like I said, we'll be able to identify narcissists much quicker, and it's going to take their power away. On top of the fact that we'll be educating people in areas where the education system has failed us. Because if the education system taught us about narcissism, especially at the extent at which survivors of narcissistic abuse are talking about narcissism, it wouldn't have gone this far, or it would have been stopped much sooner. But the justice system failed us in this area. Now we're going to have to challenge I said the justice system. I meant to say the education system. The justice system too, but the justice system only knows what we choose to share. The education system, on the other hand, has failed us because they refused to teach us this stuff when they knew about narcissism. A lot of these well, I don't know the correct term to use, but a lot of these educators know about narcissism. And some of them are narcissists, and some of them have intentionally refused to teach us about this stuff so that narcissism can thrive and they can get away with their devious acts. Now, some people are completely unaware about narcissism, and there are some people who are educating themselves on narcissism, and it's getting to the point where they're teaching about narcissism, and I respect that. But for those who know about narcissism and are either choosing to be enablers and staying quiet, or are narcissists themselves, are now at the point where they have to compete with people who are choosing to share what they know about narcissism, whether they're professionals, psychologists, or not. So, I strongly advise everybody who has been through narcissistic abuse, whether it was a family dynamic, whether it was at the work dynamic, whether it's through gang stalking, human trafficking, whether it was through a romantic relationships or your peers, whatever form of narcissistic abuse that you have faced, share with people so that we all have a mutual understanding of how evil thrives in the hearts of people, of men, excuse me, how evil thrives in the hearts of man. So that not only we can put a stop to it, but that so that more people feel comfortable receiving the help that they need for mental disorders. So with that being said, I think I've shared everything that I've had to say on this topic. And I strongly encourage those who have been through narcissistic abuse, especially in family dynamics, to comment in, to share their story in the comment section below and encourage others, and to look more, do more research and look more on this topic so that you can defend yourself against family members who you may suspect are narcissists. Good luck, everybody, and peace out.